All right, Lawrence. Well, this is your podcast, and I am so excited that you're here. So, before we keep going, I would just love you to just pop in a couple things about who you are.
Like you said, we were talking off air. I'm a self-development junkie, and I've always loved to push the limits. And I've always had this fear that when I'm an old person, I don't want to be an old person with regrets. So I've always lived my life that way. And when I was very young, I was like a lot of young men, eager to prove myself and make money and try to get success that way. And I was very fortunate through I took some risks and they paid off, and I ended up being very wealthy before I was 30. And then I took a sabbatical, and I was really passionate about martial arts, and I wanted to test myself. So I fought professionally for about 5 years, and I traveled the world, and I did a bunch of cool things like ultra marathons in different countries and just pushing my limits. And then I changed careers in my mid 30s because I was very foolish with my money, and I started in real estate. And that's what I do today. So now I live with my son and my wife in about an hour south of Chicago, and I still teach jujitsu and I work in real estate. And I love just getting on shows like this and just talking about mindset and small wins, because I really believe a good life is about as many good days as possible. And you're not going to achieve a great thing in a day. You can work slowly towards a great thing, but I just want as many small things in good days as I can when it's all said and done.
I love that. Small steps to big wins, huh?
Exactly, yeah. Because so many times people look at they're on step 3 and they're looking at step 50, and for them it's very
Mhm.
intimidating. Whereas I'm a big believer. If I look back at all the things I'm proud of in my life, whether it's professionally or personally, it's always been slow and steady. And there's a wonderful quote I think by Lucretius, and it said it was something about small drips hollow out a stone, and it's the idea of just these little drips of
Mm.
water, and over the years it can wear through stone. So it's very powerful, that idea of just small things done consistently. And I'm sure many of your other past guests have said this quote, but I think it was Tony Robbins. He may be quoting somebody, but he talked about how most people, we always overestimate what we can do in 1 year, but we underestimate what we can do in 10. And that's because it's 10 times the compounding effect of 1 year onto the next year onto the next year. And that's an approach I've always lived my life by. And the one thing that I just realized recently, actually, was a really wonderful realization. I was always very driven and goal orientated. I realized that I can't wait to achieve my goals to be happy. I have to be happy today, knowing that I'm going to move to where I want to be. And listen, life, I'm much more open now, I'm a bit older and wiser to the chances of life. Sometimes you have good luck, sometimes you have bad luck, sometimes your goals happen, sometimes they don't. But I'm so much more happy knowing that I'm going to try my best to get to where I want to be. I don't have to be there to be happy because life is too short. So that's been a really wonderful
Mhm.
realization that I've come to.
That sounds great because if you think about it, if you base your happiness on whether or not you achieved that goal, then if you didn't get to that goal, then you've got your happiness isn't really there.
And even best case scenario, you achieve it. I don't know about you, but all the biggest goals that I have achieved, I always had a bit of a come down after. And I remember the first time I had that, I was 16, and it was the mandatory exams you have in high school. And I did the exams, and I was hanging out with one of my brother's friends, my older brother. He was very wise, this guy. He's a bit older than me. And I was like, man, I just feel so bummed because it was like this big focus the last month. I was studying, studying, studying. And now it's over. It's like this come down. And he said, don't worry, that's perfectly natural. And we watched like 4 indie flicks in a row and fell asleep, and that was that. And that was, looking back now, it's so funny. That was such a wise piece of knowledge to know that every time you achieve something great, there is this natural come down. And actually, my mum's from France, and there's a French, I think it's called the contre coup. There's a French word for that exact thing. So, for instance, I
Mm.
did a half Ironman, and I really pushed myself. And I remember after being kind of tired and a little bit grumpy, and my mum, I was in France at the time with my parents, my mom's like, "Oh, you have the contre coup. It's this natural thing you get, the kind of the letdown feeling after." So you think that's the best case scenario. You achieve your goals, and there's a bit of a come down. So humans are happiest when we're progressing, but we haven't arrived. So that's a great thing for anyone listening to remember. Is so many times humans are impatient. I've always been very impatient. You're always trying to achieve, and you want to trying to get to that next step. But by having that
Yeah.
mindset, listen, if I get there, then in order to be happy, I've got to get to the next step and the next step, and very quickly it becomes very, very difficult or very complex or sometimes even impossible. So if we can stretch those steps out and enjoy the process, I've realized that that's kind of the secret to a rich life. And this is something I mean, as you can tell, I'm a, like you said, self-help junkie. I always love thinking and reading and listening and learning and talking. And this is something that just kind of came to me maybe 6 months ago. So it's been a very recent. I'm turning 45 next month. I'm not a spring chicken, and it's taken me a long time to figure this out for myself. And it's been such a relief because it's like this is the way I'm going to live the rest of my life, is just enjoying the journey.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, there was so much packed in there. Yeah, enjoying the journey and a time frame, putting things into the proper time horizon. And you were talking about we overestimate what we can do in a year and then underestimate what we can do in 10. And when you said that, I thought about it takes 10 years to be an overnight success. And
Yes.
how we just, we forget that there are sometimes things in life that happen pretty quickly. Like you can meet somebody and that one person can change your life or change the trajectory of your life. But it's a lot of those wins that we have daily are done in the micro movements. It's just not
Yes.
done, and we forget that. We want the big thing, like, everybody's looking for the next scratch off lottery ticket, or they're looking for the next YouTube reel that's gonna go viral, or, we want that fix of something that's gonna give us that high. When you were running marathons, and I'm thinking of the one in Antarctica because I find that fascinating, to go run in Antarctica, but when you finished that, did you still experience that letdown at the end? Or
Uh,
do you like, how do you navigate that now that you know that that's natural and normal?
That was the first
Yeah.
that was New Year's Day last year, so just over a year ago, and I was in Antarctica, which was such a bizarre and odd place to be for a week that I didn't have too much of a come down. That was actually wonderful because I actually went there to almost cross off a bucket list item. I'd run marathons on the other six continents, and I was trying to be the first jiu-jitsu black belt to have run marathons on all seven. A made up silly title, but I thought it was kind of cool. And I was like, okay,
I think it's cool.
I gotta go to Antarctica. And then so I had everything planned, and it's not easy to get to. And I was supposed to go the year before, and I was in Cape Town. That's where we were departing from Cape Town. And we had the safety briefing, and they went through the kit, and you had to buy extra kicks. It's very cold, and we're all ready. We go to the airport the next day. We're waiting to board the plane, and then suddenly, oh, the owner of the company that was sending us there said, "Guys, we need to talk." So we all huddle into a little conference room, and he said, "I'm so sorry, guys, you can't go." And I was
Oh,
with some very high-powered CEOs and people way wealthier and more powerful and more successful than me, and they were very upset, and they were kind of arguing back and forth. And he said, "Listen, there's been an outbreak of COVID on the camp, and they're very, very strict with their rules. And I could lose my license to go to Antarctica if I take you, so you can't go." And we ended up compromising that they had to fly supplies out anyway. So they said, "Listen, you can come for 4 hours while we're going to fly the plane out. You can do a hike for a few hours, and you have to come back when the plane comes back, and you can come back next year for free." So I got to spend a few hours in Antarctica the year before, and we just went for this hike, and it was so surreal because I think we landed at 2 in the morning and it's bright daylight, and we did a 3 hour hike, came back, had a little snack, and then back on the plane, fell asleep, and woke up in Africa. It felt like a dream, the whole thing. And then it was a whole nother year, and I trained all winter in Chicago for the first time for the marathon. So I was like, damn, so it'd been so much anticipation. But it was actually so wonderful
oh my
because, and the other one was just an uber successful businessman from Israel. And spending a week with them was so interesting because they were both about a decade older than me, incredibly wealthy,
god.
and I could see how it meant so much to them both. It's so funny. We have no service, so you're isolated from the world. And they were so happy to get away from everything because the stress of their lives. And it's such a good realization. There's so many people. If you're not where you want to be financially, you're going to look to an uber wealthy person and think, oh, if I only had his wealth, then all my problems will
Mhm.
go away. But all it means is your monetary problems go away, but you have a whole new set of problems. So I bonded, and we bonded, the six of us really bonded on that trip. And it was such a wonderful time that I think that helped. I felt like I had a lot of spiritual development. Just we had breakfast, lunch, and dinner together. We did some hiking together. We did a lot of things. And it was really cool. They were supporting me. They were waiting for me at the end of the marathon. And then we all had some champagne. It was just such a cool experience that I actually didn't have a come down because it was a trip that I was unexpected. And I think that's one of the things
Yeah.
in life. The different the metric, if you're going to be happy or not happy, is the difference between expectation and reality. So my
Mhm.
expectation was I'm going to train for a really hard physical event in a very difficult climate. But the reality was I had a real wonderful week with lovely people, and I just felt like I grew so much, and you're surrounded by love and good energy and interesting people, and it was just such a wonderful trip. So sorry, that's a long answer, but I didn't have a come down. That was actually
No,
really nice.
that's okay.
I didn't have a come down.
Oh, well, that's good to hear. I mean, I've heard the saying that people would say, like, "I love to climb mountains that don't have any tops," or, "I love to run races that have no finish lines,"
Yes.
and you just keep going and going. Now, that trip to Antarctica was unexpected. Like, you were expecting to go and you were expecting to run, and then all of a sudden, of course, you're not gonna run now. What are your thoughts on in that case, you had to surrender to the flow of life. Then you got to either surrender to what's happening or you can take things into your own hands and just go forward and like, kind of like tour de force it. What's your perspective on that?
That is such a wonderful question, and I've been thinking a lot about that fairly recently. This idea that I think it comes with youth versus wisdom when you get a bit older. When I was young, I was really trying to fight through life to get what I wanted, whether it's the goals, whether it's the career achievements, whether it's the girl. Like I was always, I felt like I was fighting to get the life I wanted. And now I'm older. I still believe to an extent you do have to fight a little bit, but you have to surrender certain things. So for instance, a lot of people are very politically opposed, and they'll spend their whole life fighting for a political ideology online. But they're wasting their life, and both I guarantee you, both parties don't give don't care about them. They're irrelevant. So it's like you have to surrender certain things, or you could spend your whole life being angry and bitter because if you work hard and you save money, every year you're losing the purchasing power of that dollar because we live in a system where the Federal Reserve is constantly adding to the money supply, and we've seen a century of inflation basically. So there are certain
Mhm.
things where you just have to accept that that's the world we live in, and they're the rules we play. And I do really love that analogy of life as a game, because listen, life isn't a game, and life is very precious. And when you deal with hardships and tragedy, it's really difficult. But just by having that kind of overall picture of life is a game, and I'm going to try and play it the best I can, I feel like it just gives you a really good philosophy for living life. And when you're playing a game, typically you have
Mhm.
rules and constraints of the game, and that's kind of the rules and constraints of life. And so once you accept those, then you're going to probably fight better. So if I'm fighting for a better life, I'm going to try to fight the right battles, and I'm not going to fight the losing battles. And I'm going to be a bit more open to kind of going with the flow of life. So as opposed, I feel like when I was young, I was a real fighter, and I was also like a philosophical fighter, I guess. And now I want to be a philosophical surfer. I want to be surfing the waves of life. And especially just, I'll give you an analogy in my day job, real estate. Every year since I started in real estate, it's a business where you get better, you increase your networks, and you increase your competency, and you tend to just, your wealth is going to go up. So your business in general, if you look at most people's career trajectory, it's going to be going up. But if you work in real estate last year, most people had a terrible year last year because the interest rates went up 2.5 times. So you can't fight that. Like you
Mhm.
can't be upset that you're not going to have your best year in a down market. You just have to accept it and do other things. And one thing that I did last year was I try to focus on spending a lot of time with my son because I knew he was young. I'm finishing writing a book on real estate. I tried to use the downtime to write a book. I took some nice vacations, and I'm not trying to fight the market. So I'm so glad you brought that up
Mhm.
because I think there's two things we have to balance. The first is the philosophy for achievement in life, and the second is the philosophy for happiness in life. And of course, achievement and happiness are related, but there's so many successful people who I promise you at the end of their life would have a lot more regrets of and there's actually been a book. I think her name was Bronnie Ware. She wrote a book, Five Regrets of the Dying, and she talked about it. She worked as in the hospital dealing with a lot of people at the end of their life, and she said there were these five themes that kept coming back. I wish I spent more time with family. I wish I'd been less worried about work. I wish I'd worked less. I wish I'd not cared about what people thought about me and really followed my own passion, let go of the expectations of my
Yeah.
family, my friends, society. And I think there's such good things to remember because it's so easy. And I think my whole life, I've been very contrarian. And all my friends were like, man, you're kind of crazy. Right? When I'm telling them I'm going to start my own business, when I left a really well paying job at 20, when I had all the success with my company. And then I'm like, you know what? I gave my company away so I could be a professional fighter. Like, what are you doing? People thought I was crazy. But even me having that mindset, I still have to constantly fight against the expectations of society. And I think that's so important is like you have to spend time, and it's like that Joseph Campbell quote. He says something about recommending I think he went to a cabin. He spent a few years after college. I think it was right after the Great Depression. There was no jobs. And he said, I don't know what I'm going to do. So he spent years just reading, and thinking. And I think that's such good advice for anyone who's young and they don't really know what they want to do, or someone who's a bit older and you don't really know what you want to do, but you don't want to be doing what you're doing, and but you don't know what
Mhm.
that next step is. You just have to spend a lot of time just with your thoughts, and of course, listen to podcasts, read books, try to find people who inspire you, who think the same way as you. Go deep in different ways, because we live in a world where we're in a attention economy and we're getting bombarded by so many things all the time. Especially my day job is real estate.
Yeah.
I'm getting texts, calls, and emails nonstop. So one of the reasons I love conversation like this with you, so is my phone's in the other room and we can be present and I can actually think. And I get inspiration from this. Like, you're
Yeah.
inspiring me. So I think that's such good advice for people, is just spend time and try to figure out what you want from your life. Forget about the expectations of your mother or your best friend or your boss, or anyone that's influenced you, or what you expect that society expects of you, and really try to figure out what you want. And I think I have so much respect for
Yeah.
people, not that like the metric for me of success is, are you living a life authentic to you? It's not about if you have a title or if you have a paycheck or X amount of money in the bank. For me, that means nothing. And I'm so grateful looking back. I quote this a lot. It's Soren Kierkegaard. He wrote in his journal. He wrote, "Life has to be lived forward, but we can only understand it when we look back." And so when I look back at my life, I'm so grateful that I made all that money when I was young, because if I hadn't, I might have been spending my whole life chasing money, thinking this is going to be happiness. But when I had all that money, it was
Mm.
great and it gave me freedom. But what I realized was, if I'm going to be an old guy with all this money when I'm older, but I never took the risk to follow my real passion, which was fighting at the time, I'm going to have regrets. So that's not going to be a successful life. And I realized that at 30 years old. I was like, so that made my choice so easy. It's a no brainer. I'll give away the company and I'll
Mm.
follow my dreams. And who cares if I blow through all my money? And it doesn't matter. I can always make money again, but you can never make the time again. And if you're in a something that's time sensitive, which physical sports is time sensitive, you have to take opportunities. Same as there's a statistic recently with people that put off having children because they're so career driven, and we all have body clocks, biological body clocks. So a lot of people are realizing too late that they can't have children, and then they wish they had thought about that before. So that's just another example of just trying to figure out what
Mm.
what you want. Don't let society tell you having a family isn't fun. One of my messages is, I love being a dad, and it's been the best thing for me. But 4 years ago, when I wasn't a parent, I only had negative associations with having a child, because in my mind I
Mm.
couldn't do the cool things that I wanted to do. It would be this anchor around me, this artificial constraints, and suddenly I thought that life would be a lot less interesting. And what I didn't realize is I didn't know what I didn't know, and that's such a wonderful thing. Now I'm much more open to. I know now that there's a lot of things I don't know, and in 5, 10 years, hopefully, I will know them.
Yeah. That's the beauty of parenting.
Yeah.
Every day, you just don't know, something else will come up. I have 3 kids, but they're all in their 20s. So,
Wow.
I'm
Okay.
on the other side. I'm just laughing at your story. There was a lot in there. I I think it's really interesting that you were in your there's a few things I'm gonna pull out of that. In your 20s, you didn't mention it before, but I knew it from your background that you're very successful. It's called fixed derivatives trader, right? Fixed
Yes.
derivatives options trader on the floor in Chicago. And you had that, then you had a company, you walked away from that. Just listening to that, somebody, at least I'm thinking like there's a fear factor there. It's there's something about leaving the comfort of being able to have that job and that security and then walk away from it and walk away from your business. How did you mitigate fear, or
It was.
what was the mindset around that?
So you just brought back a beautiful memory. I was having breakfast with one of my friends who was a trader. He was older, and he was kind of like my big brother on the trading floor. And he was a really big guy too. He's a former football player. So we were chatting, and he looked at me and he said, "Lawrence," I was telling him, "I think I'm going to do this, and I'm going to follow my dream. I'm going to give up my company." And he said, "Lawrence, like, your life is way too good. Like, you're never going to do this. You're crazy." And I remember we finished breakfast and finished the day, and I think I was leaving. I was on the way home, and I was really thinking. I was like, "He's so wrong. He doesn't know me." He's like, it's because my fear, of course you have fears. I'm like everybody else. I'm scared of everything, but I don't let my fears stop me. And my fear of being that old man with regret was a greater fear. And I think that's one of the reasons why
Mm.
we should really spend time asking ourselves what we want out of life, And then the fear of missing out on that hopefully will be bigger than the fear of giving up what you have, because it's so easy as humans to get stuck in these patterns, and we're creatures of habit. And so when you're it's always so easy to make this. How many times have I heard people tell me, oh, Lawrence, I can never do that because I need health insurance for my family. You know,
Mhm.
it's not easy. And health insurance living in America is expensive. I spend a fortune every month for my family for health insurance. It's not easy to do it, but nothing I'm proud of in my life has been easy. And ultimately, at the end of your life, do you really want to say, well, I had a health insurance, but I sacrificed my dreams? I don't want to be that person.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask you, how did you come up with your title
Yeah.
of this podcast? Because small steps, big wins. It's a kind of a philosophy I really agree, and that's why we're kindred spirits. But I'd love to know a little bit how you came up with that.
Actually, I don't think I've had anybody ask me. So, yeah, I'm more than happy to tell you. So, Small Steps, Big Wins podcast came out of the mastermind group that I'm part of back in October 2022. Prior to that, I had no idea what the mastermind group was. And I was at a point in my life where I realized I need to change something. I just didn't know what it was.
Mm.
So my journey started even like a little bit before that. And you mentioned Joseph Campbell before, and he talks about the hero's journey, he talks about that welling up that's coming inside of you. I came from a teaching background and then went into financial advising. Hanging around these people, and I figured I got to go do something. And all these people that were in this group had incredible stories. And the stories were just captured within this Facebook page. They were taking small steps and they were doing these
Yeah.
really cool things. So as I watched these stories in the Facebook group, I've like, well, Sue, you got to do something. What are you going to do? Let's do a podcast. It was
I
low
love that.
risk for me. Plus, I like the challenge. I'm like, I think it'd be pretty cool to do a podcast. And I like talking and I can relate to people. And I figured, well, if it failed and didn't go anywhere, then I just ride off into the sunset and the podcast is over and it's done.
That's beautiful, and you're still going.
So, and I'm still going. I'm on, I don't know, over 100 and some episodes so far. I started January 21st of 2023 was my first podcast episode. And I've
Wow.
had a number of people since tell me they're like, I love the name of your episode or your podcast. So that's really where it came from was just I just watched these people taking small steps, big wins. Nobody else had that podcast name. And I said, hey, let's go for it.
I love
And
that.
it's been great because it allows me to talk to a lot of different people, coaches, authors, millionaires, people who've never been on podcasts before. I get to talk to other podcast hosts. So I love it. It's a lot of fun.
Well, I just love that idea
So
of
that's my surrender moment.
well, Sue, I think the idea of small steps is it's so we just have that natural human aversion to huge changes. So how do you make a huge change that's going to stick? Well, you do an almost infinite amount of very small steps over time. And then I look back at I use fighting as an example. I had my first pro fight at 30, but I walked into my first martial arts gym a week before my 13th birthday, and I grew in those 17 years immeasurably. But if I tried to walk into a gym just before I was 13, like a fighting gym, and I would have probably lasted half a session. So I grew over many, many years. And it's just the same with real estate. Like I have people sometimes ask me that for mentorship, and they're like, okay, I've been doing this 6 months and I want to be like you, Lawrence. And I was like, well, I'm in my ninth year, but I also had a background. I have an MBA in finance. I've also done a lot of self growth. I also have a big network through my financial life before. I have a good reputation. Like I have a lot of things that took many, many years to get. So
Yeah.
of course you can streamline the process, I guess. But one thing that I don't like is I'm actually a big fan of Tim Ferriss. So I don't mean to throw him under the bus, but his whole idea of kind of life hacks, like because life hacks to me it implies that there's a shortness and to greatness.
There's a
And I
shortcut.
think
Yeah.
yeah, and I think there's ways to be more efficient, but I just don't think there's too many shortcuts. And everything I'm proud of has taken a long time. So I just it's so interesting as a father of a young boy trying to think about how I'm going to explain some of these things to him, because I would love to give him my wisdom, and I'm going to try my best to. But at the same time, I know through human nature, if I say something, it's going to have an almost infinitesimal, a very small resonance with him. Whereas if he has a harsh experience, he'll never forget the lesson. So it's like Yes, of
Mhm.
course. Does he need to get beat up to realize that that's not fun? No, of course not. Like, there's certain things like, does he need to get robbed at gunpoint to know that that's not fun? No, of course not. There's certain things where, of course, you want to try and shield him from them.
Right.
But there's other things like, we all know that everyone's going to have, their first, maybe second, maybe their third serious heartbreak and be devastated. You can't save people from heartbreak. It's part of growing up, right? All of these things that you
Yeah,
just have to
yeah,
get through as a young adult. So I just think it's so interesting trying to give him those lessons. And I think the biggest lesson that I can give him is actually one of the reasons that I moved to. So Marisa lives maybe 8 houses down on the same street, and her
yeah. That's
husband,
amazing.
yeah, her husband, shout out Dr. Eric, is one of my best friends. He found this house, and I was on my sofa. I'm a night owl, so my wife was asleep, and it was, I think my wife and son were both asleep, and it was probably 1 in the morning, and I'm winding down for the night. I think I was just doing a last couple of emails and maybe just relaxing, reading a book or something. And he sends me a text because he's an ER doctor, so he's working a night shift. So he sends me a text. He says, "Lawrence, I've just found the house for your family." And I said, "I'm not really looking for a house right now." Very funny. And he said, "No, no, I'm serious." He said, "It's just come out on the street." And he starts sent me like 15 messages, like basically selling me on the house and the area on the street. And one of the sales points was our mutual friend now, but at the time I barely knew him. In between us, a couple of doors down, is the owner of a jiu-jitsu studio. And he's a old school jiu-jitsu black belt. His wife's a black belt. His two boys are jiu-jitsu champions, that kids champions. And he said, "Lawrence, imagine raising your son in the environment." So he's around. He has a mentor and an instructor next door. He has
Yeah.
boys look up to that are living this wonderful like path, like modern day samurais. They're so respectful and disciplined. They're just wonderful, wonderful children. And I thought about it, and I was like, honestly, yeah, that's exactly what I want. And it's so wonderful because I've become really, really good friends with him, and he's 10 years older than me. And he told me, Braulio, my neighbor, he said, I was saying about how I kind of drifted apart from my brother. We're not very close. And he said, "Don't worry, I'll be your big brother, and I'm going to mentor your son." And it was just such a beautiful moment. And I was like, man,
Wow.
that's what I hoped having to move here. So that idea of just giving him a mentor and something physical and also intellectual, that jiu-jitsu is very, very hard. And I think it's going to be the perfect thing for him to grow. It's a really wonderful sport, and it's just taken off all over the world. I've got so many friends who will never done any martial arts, and they'll send me a photo of their 6-year-old girl or their 9-year-old boy. It's like, "Oh, my son just did his first tournament," or
Mm.
"My daughter came second." It's so cool that people are using jiu-jitsu as a vehicle for self-development. And I think we have to, it doesn't matter what it is.
Yeah.
It can be podcasting, it can be public speaking, it can be jujitsu, it can be, so many different things, but we're using it as a vehicle to better ourselves. So I love that you realized
Mhm.
that you needed something and you chose a podcast. And that's very prolific. You've been doing this just over a year and you've done over 100 episodes. I mean, that's an incredible amount of output. And just like you said, like
Thank you.
you get to talk to all these wonderful people. How are you not going to gain wisdom and inspiration from that? Of course you will.
Oh,
So it's
yeah,
been wonderful.
absolutely. But I wanna go back to this idea of positive energy, bringing positive things your way when you're looking for those things, and I would imagine that in the course of those texts with the ER doctor at 1 a.m. in the morning, there was I would guess there was something resonating in your soul that said, "Wait a minute, I need to pay attention to this text and not blow it off."
A hundred
And then
percent.
now look at all the things that you see that fall into place, and it goes back to that surrendering to life
Mm.
too, that we allow the universe to bring and it just really depends on what people think, whether you're God-based or spirit-based or whatever, but whatever you believe, there's energy out there, and there's the science that backs it up that we are energy people. When we are positive, we radiate at a higher frequency, we radiate positive things, and we want to be around positive people. And when we're depressed, and it happens, but there are people who are in that lower energy state where they're just constantly in that level of depression. And that gets really hard to be around.
Well, I used to think energy was
There's,
nonsense, but I'll give you, anyone can relate to this.
yeah,
When your
I did
phone rings,
too. I did
well,
too.
well, so listen, anyone listening to this can relate. If your phone rings and you see their name pop up, you're going to have three reactions. You're going to have apathy, you're going to have excitement, or you're going to have dread. And it's always the same. And I want to be the
Yeah.
guy that when my name pops up on people's phones, they're like, "Oh, I can't wait to talk to Lawrence." And same with you, like you have such good energy. That's one of the reasons you're a good podcast host. Is straight away the
Oh,
first
thank
two
you.
minutes of us talking, I could tell you're just a wonderful person. And I wanted to talk to you, and I'll be completely vulnerable and open, and nothing's off limits. And I'll bare my soul because you have good energy. And I think that's such a wonderful thing. And it's also something that we can create. Don't think, I'm a
Hmm.
very big believer in we can, within obviously limits, you've got to have a growth mindset. You can create great things through hard work and, small steps, big wins. I look at, like, if you ask all the kids I grew up with in high school, said who's the most likely guy here to be a professional fighter, I promise you I'd be very close to the bottom of the list. But I created that through hard work. And so I think that
Mhm.
if you're kind of a more introverted person, you're quieter, maybe you're a bit pessimistic, you can work on that. And I can tell you from experience,
Mhm.
I remember in college having a couple of girls tell me that I was a bit morose and they thought I was a bit negative and pessimistic because, and then I even had girls tell me I think too much. And I thought I remember at the time being a young man thinking, that's so silly. Isn't the whole point of life? I used to love reading philosophy. Isn't the whole point of life to think? But at the time, I guess I was coming across a bit negative. And I remember I heard a Mike Tyson interview when I was about 15, very impressionable age. And he said, I think he was in prison
Mhm.
doing a CNN interview. And he said, I always want to be pessimistic. And that way, when the good things happen, it's a surprise. And I remember thinking, what a great
Mm.
philosophy to live life. And now I think, God, what an awful philosophy. Because when you're pessimistic, bad things tend to happen to you. So it's,
Yeah.
I
Well,
see friends that have the same kind of essence almost, but one is super positive and one is a bit more negative. And I just see so many good things happen to the positive people and so many less good things happen to the negative people. So it really is powerful, and I'm
yeah.
so glad you said that too. That you didn't used to believe it, but now you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah, no, I didn't, and if I mean, I know people who've known me, like, a long time, and I would never first of all, I didn't know about positive, negative energy or law of attraction or how manifestation, any of that stuff. All of that has been relatively new to me within the last, I would say, less than year, but I used to be this very down, negative, depressed person, and my encouragement to anybody listening is that you can turn that around. You don't have to stay in that state. And I've done a lot of work through story work and through going back into my past and analyzing and just reframing a
Mm,
lot of what has happened to me to realize, wait a minute, it's my perception, a lot of it, and a lot of it's choice. A lot of
yes,
it just boils down to I chose. I
yes,
made a number of choices, X number of year of choices, and it's gotten me to the place where I'm at that it just, like that's the one, and the other is I have a friend of mine, Chase. I don't know if you know who Chase Tollison is, but Chase is a story work coach. He told me, he's like, if you're trying to process something, put the phrase "it happened" after it. And if you're trying to replay something over and over again into regret and keep going there back again, it just having the realization that it happened and saying that gives you that level of acceptance
mm.
to whatever it is that you were trying to process. I thought it was very fascinating in anyway in the language how you use that it's happened, and it ties into I was so I wanted to ask you about going back to energy. I was listening to a podcast with Daniel Priestley in it, and he was talking about with or without you energy, and I wanted your thoughts on this. And his what he meant by with or without you energy was that when he walks into a situation or he goes into something, he thinks, you know what? I'm going into this thing. It's going to happen with or without you. So the person was asking him, well, how does that apply to relationships where people will say, well, it's one plus one equals one, husband plus wife equals one person? He says, no, 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 no. He said, when I met my wife, it was one plus one equals 11. And we both have this with or without you energy. But when we're together, it magnifies w our energy levels and who we are. I was wondering what your thoughts are on that.
That's beautiful, and I think the best couples could be happy by themselves, but they're infinitely happier and more fulfilled together. But I think if you're trying to use if you're in a relationship and you're trying to use the other person as a crutch and you're too
Mhm,
needy or reliant or you're too, I guess you can't be happy without them, then it's probably not the healthiest relationship, I think. And listen, relationships, I think one of there's so many classes that I wish they would teach kids in school. One of them would be financial literacy. One of them would be about kind of controlling your mind. One of them would be about relationships. Just if I look back at, life is everything in life is relationships. It's not just your romantic relationships. What
Mhm.
about your personal relationships with your friends? What about your business relationships? What about a relationship between a mentor and a mentee? There's so many different types of relationships that we have. What about the relationship with your parents, and your children? There's so many different relationships we have, and the more skillfully we can navigate them, I think the more rich our life will be. And that's something that I've learned too. I always thought, just to give background to people listening about me, I'm turning 45, and I think since I was about 15, I've read on average 1 to 2 books a week. I've been a huge reader my whole life, so I've read
Wow.
thousands of books, and some of them weren't crazy books, but I've read the classic novels like War and Peace. I've read so many self-help books. I've read widely in many different themes. I'm fascinated and curious, endlessly curious, and I have a stack of 100 books on my to-read list, which intimidates me when I look at it because it's hard to find the time. But I force myself to find the time because I realize that I don't read to get the wisdom out of the books. I read because it's the way I regenerate my energy, and it just brings me so much happiness. And it's almost
Mhm.
like the cherry on top, the icing on the cake is that I get a bit of wisdom and knowledge. But having read all those books, I remember when I met my wife, there were so many different things that she helped me through, and luckily she actually changed careers and became a therapist. And it was funny because when I met her, I used to hear her on the phone with her girlfriends, and I would tell her, "You realize you're a therapist, right? You don't have the qualifications, you don't get paid for it, but you are a therapist." And she's like, "Yeah, I guess I am." And so I encouraged her to quit her career, which she hated, go back to school, and she just graduated as a therapist a couple of years ago, and now she loves what she does. And she was pretty much from a month in was turning down clients because she was getting so many referrals because she's so good. And one thing she's really helped me realize is there's so many different things that the way talking about fighting life or going with the flow of life, I would tend to be like that in relationships too, where I was much more of a fighter in a relationship. So if we argued, I'm going to want to win the fight, win the argument. And there's so many, like now I'm much more relaxed, and it's not about trying to win the argument. It's about recognizing that she's not really angry at whatever she's angry about. She's just tired and had a long day. Or I'm not really angry at whatever I'm angry about. I just need to have a little snack and maybe a 10-minute nap. Like this, just you learn how to, you learn that
Yeah.
conflict resolution is a big thing, but also like, what are you actually arguing about too? And it's the same with, I actually had a wonderful, it just reminded me yesterday, one of my best friends said to me, he said something like, "You're much better at controlling your emotions than you used to be," and it was such a wonderful compliment because that's one of my weaknesses. We've got to know our strengths and weaknesses. One of my weaknesses is I'm passionate, and when you're passionate, you tend to, incite to an argument. Especially me being a former fighter, if someone is rude to me on the phone, I'm gonna let them have it. I'm not gonna put up with shit. I stand up for myself. So sometimes I can go a bit too far and things like that. And he said, you do so much of a better job of not letting things upset you like you used to. And I was so happy to hear
Mm.
that because I want people listening to this to know, especially if you're 30 years old or you're a bit younger, is that life is about constant refinement and learning yourself and trying to do better. And I want everyone who's done things that they're not proud of to be a little easier on yourself because we're human and it's not easy. So, we've all made so many mistakes. And I think a lot of people's self talk is so much harsher than they would never talk to a good friend the way they talk to themselves. They'd be way
Mhm.
more easy and gentle to a friend, but they're so hard on themselves. And that's something that it's one thing that we just got to keep doing better and just keep learning ourselves and learn our triggers. And in relationships, a lot of my married friends who've been married a long time, they had some rocky years early on until they really learned how to resolve conflicts in a good way, or they learn to stay away from
Mm.
things that trigger their partner or whatever it is like that. And I think these are such great skills to learn. It's just how to deal with people. I think is so wonderful. Sorry, I think I'm rambling. I think we went a bit off
No,
track,
that's
but
I'm enjoying listening to you. No, 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 the idea of self-compassion, I think that's one area where people in general, we're just not gracious to ourselves. And do you find it more like if you have overachieving friends or high achieving, like that high achieving mentality, that it's a lot harder to have self-compassion when
Mm,
you are a very driven person and you don't succeed at something, or you miss that goal, or it didn't go the way you wanted to. I think that self-compassion is just it's if we don't show it to ourselves, it's gonna be difficult to show it to others. Sometimes we can
Mhm.
fake it, fake it till you make it and be nice to somebody, but when comes to shove, like you were saying, when you get grumpy and you need, a snack and 10-minute nap, the truth really does come out that self-compassion just really isn't there anymore. So, and you mentioned self-talk. So, is there any life hacks, tools, tricks, tips that you would have for your own self-talk to help you if you go down that road that you don't want to go down? How do you course correct?
I'm a big believer in sunk costs. Like if I have just a terrible day and I do everything wrong, it's okay. It's just a day. Tomorrow's a new day. And I think the biggest muscle that we can work on that's been so beneficial to me, and I'd recommend anyone does this too, is if you're a person of your word, then it's going to go a long way with other people, but it's going to go the longest way with yourself. So, for instance,
Mm,
if I have a couple of non-negotiables every day. So one of my non-negotiables is I try and get some type of exercise in every day. And there might be a day a month where my day gets away from me, and I think I'll be better off just resting. But it's quite rare. And sometimes that means going for a run at 11 o'clock at night when it's the last thing I want to do. And the reason I do it, it's not for my body and for exercise. It's probably negative in that sense. Might probably be better off just getting an early night's sleep. But I do it because I told myself that day I wanted to run and I want to be a man of my word to myself. And I think that's so important because
mm,
when you develop that muscle, it doesn't become oh, should I work out today? Or oh, should I make this awful work call, which I'm dreading, which is going to be really good for my business, but I'm kind of stalling on it because I don't want to do it, but I know I have to. There's so many little things these little decisions we make during the day. And most people know exactly what they should do, but it's just, whether it's their natural inclination to, to kind of stall on things. It's the fear. It's just laziness, whatever the thing is stopping us doing all these little things that we know we have to do. Most of the time, you know what you have to do during a day to be your best self. And of course, you're not going to
mhm,
do everything, but there's certain non-negotiables. You just say to yourself, I'm going to have an hour at the park with my son today because it's a lovely afternoon. I'm not going to waste this day. I'm going to make sure that I get a good
mhm,
workout in because that's one of my big daily priorities. And I've got to make a really difficult work call, and someone's going to be very upset with me. It wasn't my fault, but I have to tell them the bad news. I'm going to try and do that early.
mhm,
And it's just that's three examples for me personally that I do a lot, things like that. But yeah, and if I wake up and I know I've got a lot of things that I don't really want to do, it's not a case of will I do them or not. It's like I know I'm going to do them. It's not even a question because they have to get done. And that's a muscle that we can develop is be a person of your word to yourself. And I think that's such an important thing to develop because we can develop it.
mhm. How do you view your to-do list for the day then? What happens. Let me back up a minute. Are you the type of person who will put like 20 things on your to-do list for that day and get down to 18? Or do you really look at your day and it's like, okay, I know I can get those top 3 things done, and then whatever else falls into place, I'm gonna add that in. How do you
So
view that?
yeah, so I'm an entrepreneur and I work really hard. I take big risks, and one of the positive to being an entrepreneur is and something that it's very dear to me is I have to be able to say, hey, my work is going to wait because the sun just came out and it's 6 o'clock and I've got an hour and a half before it gets dark and I'm taking my two dogs and my son to the park and I'm just going to have some time for myself.
Mhm,
You have to be able to just like I don't. So I never want to make my days so packed that I don't have time to be spontaneous. But at the same time, there's there's certain non-negotiables, and so I choose to. There's certain things in real estate that I do that I do have to. Today I had some meetings this morning in person that I had to be that was a strict time. So of course I have that, but I have a lot of things that just have to get done. But there's no time, whether it's done in the next 3 hours or day and a half, it's kind of the same thing. And I kind of fit that around the most important things to me. So I'm sure you've heard that analogy with the professor and the big stones, the medium stones and the small stones. And he said if you put the big stones in, then the medium stones can fit around them, and then the little sand can fit around those. But if you fill up
mhm,
a third of the jar with sand, the big rocks aren't gonna fill it in. And it's a cheesy analogy,
right.
but it's very very true for your life. I think every morning you wake up, you have to put the most important things first, and you have to schedule your day around them. So for me, there's certain things that
Mm,
for me is I do almost every day, And a lot of time my workout tends to be around noon, and I build my whole schedule around my workout. I try and build my schedule around my family too. With my son, he's young, so I'm trying to maximize time with him. Um, and there's a lot of things that I don't really have to write on a list, but I'm after this, I'm probably going to have probably 30 minutes maybe of text and maybe a couple of calls and a few emails to do. That doesn't have to be on a list. I'm just going to do it when I get to it. So
Yeah.
you got to be careful putting these huge lists together. And number one, it's intimidating, and number two, you don't feel good because you only do 17 out of 22 things. I don't really want to live like that. I'm really
Yeah.
enjoying. I'm rereading, and I'm blanking on the author's name. It's 4,000 Weeks. I think it's Oliver somebody. Have you heard of that
Mm.
book, 4,000 Weeks?
Mm-mm.
What am I? It's
No,
about
but I got the
productivity.
idea.
Yeah, that you have
Mm.
4,000 weeks in life. And one of my friends actually gave it to me, and I read
Mhm.
it. And he was raving about it. Oh, it's so great. And I read it and I was like, it didn't resonate too much with me. And I'm actually just listening to the audiobook. I'm re-listening to it because that was about a year ago. And I feel like it's really resonating more with me. Because sometimes you just have to be in the right mood or
Mhm.
the right place for a book to resonate. And his
Mhm.
idea is he's talking about how short life is, but he said you can't go through life trying to be that guy to go through your emails because emails are just going to keep coming in. And so you have to be very, very careful.
Mhm.
If you work in a business like I do, a lot of people won't have these problems, but any kind of entrepreneur people that have a lot of people trying to get hold of them and there's a lot of small things to do every day, you have to be very careful. If you're the best person at answering emails, you're just going to get more emails. That's kind of his
Mhm.
thesis in the book. And I've noticed that with myself. A lot of time I'll be on an email chain with maybe me, an attorney, a buyer, and my assistant. And they'll come in. And if I answer it straight away, then I'm just going to get three more emails. But if I'm busy, they've asked me a question, but then my assistant might get to it or my attorney might get to it and it's done. And I'm like, oh, great, it's done. So you don't want to be the most efficient guy answering emails, put it that way. Like
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
no one on their deathbed is happy that they answered, 14
Yeah.
million emails during their life. So it's trying to pick and choose your priorities.
Yeah.
And
Get out my email box, I can die now.
exactly.
You know,
And I think, but Sue, that
it
I don't know about you, but there's one thing that when I was young, I'd love to hear your opinion on this. When I was young, I
sure.
was like, I want to watch every good movie and I want to travel to every great destination and I want to read every great book. I just wanted to do things. And now I'm so happy that I'm going to go to the end of my life and there's always going to be great podcasts to listen to and there's always going to be a book that excites me and a new movie maybe an old movie that I want to rewatch and there's going to be a country that I'd love to visit, but I never got around to visiting yet. And I just love that idea of getting excited to do new things. Don't try and do everything. And that's something that really just came to me recently,
Yeah.
and I would love to kind of hear your thought on that too.
Well, I'm a little older than you are, so if I go back to, like, my high school years, that around there, my path was a little different and my ambitions were not the same. They were kind of, I don't know, they were different. I got married at 20 and had my first
Oh
child at
wow.
23. So, as far as ambition in life and dreams and things like that, the way my life was in my 20s, I actually, by the time I was 30, I had 3 kids. So,
Wow.
my identity was a mom. My ambitions were, you were to raise your kids, you homeschooled them, that was that. So, my desires, I had them,
Mm,
they were different than parenting, but you had, at that time, they were just shelved,
right.
and it's just life circumstance for me. I don't wanna make it feel heavy, but I made a bunch of choices, and that was the life that I had, and it ran contrary to what my inner soul really wanted to do. And
Can
I
I
was
ask
just in a
you?
marriage that didn't, that it was just a tough place. It was a tough 20 some years of marriage that I had, and it is what it is, that's my
Mm,
life. It was my set of experiences that happened for me to shape who I am today. And I'm very thankful that at 52, I have an opportunity. My children are now in their 20s. So I'm obviously still a parent, but I don't parent them like they're four. I'm just in a different stage. So I'm
mm,
very thankful I have the opportunity now that I can go and pursue all those dreams, that I can live that life that I always wanted to, but was unable to. So, in a way, I'm starting over. I feel like I'm 20, even though biologically I'm not. And I'm just embracing life with, like you said, curiosity. I love curiosity. I love to ask questions. I love talking to other guests and seeing their perspectives. So,
mm,
I think everybody's path is different, but if I could leave people with anything, it's to realize that life happens for you, not to you, and
Mm,
not to go back and regret the choices that you made that might not have been in your favor, or might not have been, or it might not have produced the outcome that you wanted to. And I actually have a whole chapter in my book on regret, and I called
mm.
it Regret is a Thief,
'Cause
because
it
regret
takes
will
from the
steal.
present.
Yeah, well, regret will steal your life if you allow it. So
Mm,
there's regret that you can have over something that you did, and you can analyze it, learn from it, and move on. That's
mm,
constructive. And in that case, I even wouldn't even call it regret. It would be more like a mistake, a mistake where something
mm,
happened and you learn from it and you move on and you use it for the positive. Me personally, I went the other side of regret, which is negative rumination, which is where
mm,
you sit in it and you play it over again and you don't, you go down the God, I wish I had done that. Can I go back and do that? And in some cases, and I didn't realize this because I didn't have this self awareness, but in some cases, you try to recreate the event in order to have a different outcome, the outcome that you thought you wanted. I mean, it's crazy. It's a crazy way to think. It's a crazy way to live. But what I realized when I had this awakening was like, okay, self ruminate, like negative rumination is going to steal your life, because if you sit in this backward thinking thought, then it takes you out of the present moment, and then it robs you from thinking about wonderful places that you can go to. So,
exactly. And I'll give you a fighting analogy. Having lost plenty of times over the years,
mm, yeah.
It's easy after. There's nothing more vulnerable than being in a pair of lycra shorts, covered in blood, getting stopped in a fight in front of everyone you care about, your coaches, your good friends, your ex-girlfriend, all these things. And having been through that several times, that just the worst of the worst that can possibly happen. Um, and then the next day you wake up and you're alive, and you move on, and it's okay if the worst thing that happens to you in your life is a lost fight. It's not too bad. But I think it's given me so much resilience, and just it's
Mhm,
okay to lose. And the one thing that I want to instill to my son is, especially in sports but just in life too, is it's okay if things don't go your way as long as you try. Because we can't one of the things I love about
mhm,
fighting is you can be the better fighter 9 out of 10 times, but you have an off day, and you lose. It's not necessarily on average the better fighter tends to win, but there's a lot of luck involved too, a lot of skill and a lot of luck. And what I always tell
mhm,
people, and I'm going to tell this to my son too, is all we can control is what we can control. We can control the preparation, make sure we're in good shape and we've done everything right the 6 weeks before, and we can control our maximum effort on the day. But we can treat our body like machines, but some days you just have off days and you're sluggish and your energy's low and you're not going to perform well. It's okay. That's part of life. And I think that's such a I love what you said about regret, because there's so many things that if I could live my life again, I would do differently. But looking
mhm.
back, I'm so grateful for some of those worst moments. Like, take the worst ever heartbreak that I ever had. Well, if that hadn't happened, I wouldn't have met my wife. So, I'm so grateful. What happens if I put $1,000 in Bitcoin when it was at 15 cents and I was a Bitcoin multimillionaire? I would have missed out on a decade of growth, having lost a whole bunch of money, getting humbled, having to change career, do all these things I don't want to do to build a new career. It was
Yeah.
like I'm so happy I went through it because I grew so much as a person. But was it fun at the time? No, it sucks. And I think that's such a good message for people. If you're in a place that just it's awful and you're miserable and it just feels like the world is closing in around you and it's hard and you're tired and your body hurts, it's okay because it's crazy. But in a decade, you might miss those times. You might miss the times when
Mhm,
you were just in the trenches grinding, because so many people, I've heard this again and again. When you look back at really hard periods, most successful people say it's some of their fondest memories. And again, I use
mhm.
my fighting example. Tuesday was my hardest day when I was fighting. I used to train 4 times and it ended with a fight simulation, 5 minute rounds at the end of a long day. And then I had to drive an hour home because I live far away from this really tough gym I was training at. And I used to wake up on Tuesdays and I would hate my life. I chose to do this, but I literally
Mm.
hated my life and they were just so miserable. And now I have a photo from one of my fights in my office. I look up to it and I'm just like, oh, they were such great times. I got such fun memories at that time. But at the time, it sucked and it was so hard and painful. And that's just such a good analogy for life. It's life is weird, And just by having that mentality that when you're going through tough times, just again, I love your title, small steps, big wins. Like that when you're just at the bottom of life, all you got to do is just take one step forward. And then the next day,
Yeah.
take one more step forward, and eventually you will climb out of it. It's just such a good analogy because so often people are just like, it's hopeless, nothing's working. But it's
Mhm.
okay. You can, and I'm saying that from a person that's been in my life. I've been very lucky. I've had several real highs. I've also had a couple of real big lows. I've been, I haven't been suicidal, but I've understood why people took their lives. I really have had that feeling
Mhm.
where it just feels hopeless, and I knew how hard it was to do great things, and I just didn't know if I had the mental energy to do it again. I had that feeling, and so mental health is very tragic, but
Mhm.
try to just remember that it they say the definition of depression is not imagining better times ahead. And I'm saying that it doesn't matter how bad the situation is, there can be better times ahead. And it's such I think that
Yeah.
that is the powerful message.
Yeah, it all boils down to choice, how you choose to look at your circumstance. You mentioned about the suicidal, like being suicidal or suicidal. You didn't say ideation, but actually, in my book, there's a whole chapter on suicidal ideation because I dealt with that for over 27 years. So,
Wow.
because of my circumstances, yeah, it was a long time. But I'm on the other side. I'm still here.
Mm. Yeah.
If it wasn't for my coach, I wouldn't be here. But and that's all that's in the book. But yeah, I mean, and I find through all those hard things that I walked through that I have a choice. And you mentioned about somebody who is depressed and had a bad day, and you have to take that one more step forward. A lot of people choose not to take that step,
Mm.
and
Yes.
on that you'll stay in that same place.
Well, I love what you
But
said about choice. Sorry to
you
interrupt, Sue, but my
yeah,
son's name is
it's
Victor.
okay, choice.
My son's name is Victor, and one of the reasons is Victor Hugo was an incredible French novelist, and he cared about the rights of the common man in a time where people in France had almost no rights. So he was a wonderful man. But the real Victor that he's named after is Viktor Frankl. And for those that don't know,
Mhm,
he wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning, where he talked about his experiences in the Nazi death camps. And my great grandfather was actually a Holocaust victim. And the one thing that Viktor
mm,
Frankl says is even when you're in a death camp where you've got no clothes and almost no food, and you're basically people are dying around you from just starvation. You still have the power to choose. You still have the power to say, I'm going to keep going and I'm going to keep living.
mhm,
And tomorrow is a new day. And he got through. His mindset was what enabled him to get through the concentration camps. And then he came out and he had this wonderful long life as a therapist in Austria, I believe it was. But it's like
yeah,
when a guy like that, who was in situations that most people couldn't even imagine, can still say, I have the power to choose. Like the mind is just so powerful. And so I'm
yeah, the
so
mind
glad you
reading.
said that.
Yeah, it really does boil down to you have a choice, and it's in everything. You have a choice what you put in your body. You have a choice how you approach your day. You have a choice how you wake up. I started this practice where every morning now I wake up and the first thing I tell myself is I'm going to smile. So I smile every morning. I'm like, thank God I get another day for today and I'm happy about it. So I'm just going to smile and I go through this routine, but they're all choices. It really is. It just boils down to choices. Even how we view things that have happened to us. It's a choice what lens we choose to view it through.
And Sue,
So
can I say,
Lawrence, ever yeah.
oh, sorry, real quick. I just want to say the other side of that.
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
everything in your life is just going amazing and just you can't do it, you're winning everything in life, have a little humility because life is about ups and downs. And that's one thing
Yeah.
I find so distasteful is people where they're just killing it and they just become so big-headed and arrogant. And unfortunately, the fall is going to come, whether it's tomorrow or in time. It will always come. History's shown that. So when
Mhm.
everything's going well for you, try to have some humility and try to help people along the way and show them the path and give back and just try to be a good person. I just wanted to say that that's kind of the other side of the person
Yeah.
who's just
Yeah.
trying to put one foot in front of the other.
Yeah. Isn't that funny? I mean, I'm trying not to plug my book, but there's a part of my book that talks about trauma and how, nobody is immune
Mm.
to trauma. And what trauma looks like to people, there's just different levels of it, but and also what's traumatic to me might not be traumatic to you, but the point is nobody is immune. We'll
Mm,
all at some point have some type of traumatic event in some capacity. So to your point that, when things are going really well, hey, rejoice in that. And you're right, we do have to have a little bit of just a healthy dose of reality,
yeah,
that's, while the highs are there, it's great, it's wonderful, but there's something around the corner, not to live life in dread, obviously, but just to understand and to have that framework that when things do come our way, that this is normal. Whereas in our culture, we kind of tend to villainize bad things that happen. And they say, like, oh, that bad thing's happening to you. I grew up, my mother, I'll never forget, talk about bad things happening. I remember being sick. I was a young girl. I don't know, 5, 6, 7, whatever. And I had one of those throat things, when you get really sick and you can't talk and you can't swallow or anything. And I remember my mother telling me, well, you must have said a bad word. So this is God's punishing you and that's why you had this cold. And I thought, oh my God, I carried that around, what people say, the power in our words and how we can really take situations and, you know, manipulate them. And now that I realize when I look back at it, it's like, okay, that was her belief. That's not my belief. I don't have to believe in that. But
mm.
how we view that thing, and how we look at it that way. I don't know why I was going there, but I did.
No, I love that. And listen,
Anyway.
plug your book
Yeah.
all you want. I can't wait to read it. It
No.
sounds amazing. I mean, listen, all these things that
Thank
you're
you.
talking about, they're all really powerful concepts. So I think it's going
Thank
to be
you.
a great book. I think it's going to really resonate with a lot of
Yeah,
people.
thank you. Yeah, I can't wait to get it out. I'm like I said, I have to surrender to the publisher. I want it published by the end of the month, and they're not moving on my timeline.
Got to work on your
But that's
patience.
okay. Yeah, you know what? My coach said exactly that. He told me exactly that when we were coaching the other day. He's like, "What do you think this is trying to teach you?" And I said, "I think patience." He's like, "Yeah, bingo."
There's a lesson in
Gosh.
everything.
Yeah, there is. Well, for somebody and, like, we're pretty driven, like, you have to be driven to be who you are, to be where you are, and I'm pretty driven too, so to people who are driven, patience is not always an easy thing to grasp and embrace. I've learned
Yeah.
to embrace it, but sometimes it's still not easy,
Work in
but
progress.
it is. I ask 3 questions at the end of all of my podcasts, so I'm gonna dive into those 3, and I know the first one, now that you mentioned you've read a lot of books, I can't remember if it was like 1,000 books. I think this question's going to I don't know what this question's gonna do for you, but I'm gonna ask it anyway. Share a book or resource that has had a significant impact on you.
Uh, If I can give a couple of short ones, because I guess
Sure.
people that are listening, it depends on where they're at in their life. But if you're newly married, there's a book by Irv Yalom called A Matter of Life and Death. And he's one of my favorite authors. And he's a very old therapist in his 90s. And he talks about living through his wife of 60 plus years as she's dying.
Mm,
And it's such a powerful book if you're in a relationship to remember that one day, you guys are going to be separated by death, hopefully by death, if it's a good relationship, and to appreciate being together. It's a short read and it's very, very powerful. If people are busy entrepreneurs and they're kind of, I guess I'll recommend, because I'm rereading it, 4,000 Weeks. I think it's very powerful just to realize that, listen, being busy is not something to strive for. It's unfortunately something that a lot of us we are too busy, and you're busy being productive while your life is going by. And that's my biggest thing that I'm working on. That's my challenge is I'm trying to get things done, but I want to enjoy every day, because those days where you're super busy and you're getting stuff done and the day flies by like this, it's like, man, that's one less day that just flew by. So I think that's a really good book for busy entrepreneurs. And if you like philosophical novels, I'll tell you the book that changed my life. And that was Ayn Rand's The Fountainhead. And it's a long
mm.
book and it starts kind of slow. But if you can, in this attention deficit economy, if you're going on vacation or something and you want to leave your cell phone behind and you want to go to the pool and you want to spend hours reading a book that could change your life, Ayn Rand's The Fountainhead, it really changed my life. my old trading boss used to see me reading on the trading floor. So when it was slow, you couldn't leave because you never knew when an order would come in. So people would just read newspapers and talk nonsense. And I'd always sit there reading books because I had to be there anyway for work. So I sat there and he came up to me one day and he's like, "Oh, I see you reading here." And he gave me this book and he was an absolute awful human. It was the only nice thing he did for me in 2 years, but it changed my life. And I read it and I was like, wow, it was for me, the philosophy of the novel was kind of back to the start of this conversation is live the life that you want to live. And the main character in the book, he was all about living an authentic life, not what the life that
Mm.
society expected of him. And I read the book and I was just like, wow, this is the way I want to live my life. And so I set up my own trading company. I quit his company and I did really well for myself and I got the confidence to just be my own man and live the life of an entrepreneur. And it really did change my life. So it's just wonderful. Like if I had read it at a different time, maybe I'd have given up after 50 pages. But it was just, it's such a powerful book. And Ayn Rand she was a very interesting, complex woman, and a lot of people don't like her. A lot of people absolutely love her, but that book is just, it's absolutely incredible.
Oh, wow. Yeah. I love that we talked about living the life that you want, the authentic life, and we didn't even get into what an authentic life looks like or anything. That's just for another podcast. Actually, my second question, what is one question or topic you wish I would have asked about, and how would you have answered the question or expanded on the topic?
Well, seeing as no, I'll keep it short, but let's just talk about what you just said. What is an authentic life? I'll give you a fourth book. Sorry, my one recommendation is 7 to 4. But Martin Seligman was one of the therapists
Oh,
that
yeah.
started the positive psychology movement. And I remember his book, I think it was Authentic Happiness. My brother gave it to me when I was 26, I believe, or 24. 24. And I was on vacation with an ex-girlfriend and we were kind of bickering and young love. And I remember I just took it to the beach and I found a piece of shade and I think I sat there. I got a coffee and I sat there for like 5 hours and I pretty much read the whole book in one sitting. And the idea of it was you find what are your signature strengths, that things that give you excitement that you're good at, and if you can try and build a career around those, that's great. But if you can build a career around those and it has some concept of giving back, some concept of altruism, you're going to live a really good life. So I think that's a
Mm,
wonderful place to start is like what is an authentic self. And my signature strengths at the time, it was so interesting because at 24 it was, I remember one was like perseverance and tenacity, one was curiosity and love of learning, one was discipline and mental strength or something. They were all like, what you'd expect from a young amateur fighter and entrepreneur, that kind of mindset. And I was so curious so I've built my life the last 2 decades around that philosophy. Is my careers have always engaged my signature strengths. I've been a risk taker, which was one of my signature. I enjoy taking risk and taking ownership. But I took the tests 2 months ago, Sue, and I was blown away because there was something that was number one that wasn't even in my top five as a young man, and tenacity wasn't there anymore for me. The
wasn't
number
there,
one
right?
the number one signature strength was love, and I thought, my goodness, I've
Oh,
become a hippie.
wow.
And it was just what and it's really been wonderful because when I was fighting, there's two types of fighters. There's the guys that if they're not fighting professionally are fighting after having a couple of drinks and having an argument at the bar. There's those kind of natural fighters, and there's people
Mhm,
like me that were the cerebral fighters. If people listening have heard of George St. Pierre, he kind of sums this up. The martial artists, the ones that want to live a Bushido code, and you want to test yourself, and you're scared, and you want to face your fears. You think, what is the scariest thing I can imagine? Well, it's trying to fight a trained fighter in a pair of Lycra shorts in front of everyone I
mm.
care about. Yeah, that's pretty scary. I don't want to do that, and I know if I do that, I'm going to grow so much from it. And so that was always me. And where was I going with this? We were talking about. I lost my train of thought. There was, about the love thing. So
Authen
yes,
y
it was. So even when I was fighting, it was never about like trying to hurt somebody. For me, it was about testing myself. And the word competition comes from two Greek words, competir, and what it means is you come together. So a world record on a 100-meter world record is never going to be set on a training track. It's always going to be set in an Olympic
Mhm,
stadium with 100,000 people and millions from around the world watching because you have that pressure. Pressure creates diamonds. So for me, I love my
mhm,
competitors. For me, my competitors were, if I might not know them, but if I did know them, I knew we'd be best friends because we're very similar. But a lot of people saw when they're fighting, they see their
mm,
opponents as their enemy. For me, it was always about, we're being our best self and our opponent helps us get there. So I guess I always had that element of love in my life, but I think I'm so grateful that I have it because I'm happy and it's taken me a long time to
mhm.
get here. And the one of my mentors and best friends, Rocco Jarman, he told me, he said, everything you do in life is normally from a position of love or fear. And I just want to do as many things from a position of love as I can. And that's kind of where I'm at now in life. And so when I took that test and the first one came back as love, I couldn't believe it, but I was also incredibly proud of myself that I've changed. I'm not the same person as I was 20 years ago. And
Yeah.
nor do we want to be. So that was just such a wonderful benefit. But that's something
Wow.
I guess I wanted to talk about was it's a great book, and it's a great, you can do it online. That's, I think, if you just put the five signatures, Martin Seligman's signature strength test, you can do it
Mhm,
online. And it's a
mhm.
way of finding out what you want to try and build in your life. And listen, some people might do a job that makes good money and they have enough free time to do something that lights up their life. Not everyone wants to
Right.
be an entrepreneur, but we have to figure out what works for us. And I think that's something that comes with age, and it's why people say a lot of time older people are happier than younger people, is because it takes some time to figure out what you want and to build the life that you want. And there's always going to be things that I don't want to do. Like, I don't want to get in the cold plunge every morning, but I do it because it builds my character, and I feel really good afterwards. So it's not
Yeah,
like
I
you
do the
want.
same thing with the cold shower.
Oh, it's amazing.
Yeah, it's
It
like,
really
I don't
does.
wanna turn it on cold, but
It's
it
not
does
fun,
work.
but you feel so much better after. Aside
You
from doing
do.
things like that, like a cold shower or hard exercise, the rest of my day, I want to be around. I want to do as much of the things that I want to do as I can. So our job
Right.
to live
Positive energy. Just to s
yes, and to be around the
sorry,
people
I didn't
with
mean to
positive
interrupt
energy,
you.
exactly. So I think that's the what I would call an authentic life, is doing something that feels
Mhm.
authentic to you. It's not, making money selling shady products that's going to be stealing money from old grandmas. Like, there's so many things that people do where it's just, I know that they don't look at themselves in the mirror with happiness. And I really like what
Yeah.
you shared too about what you overcame. And you must be so proud, like when you look at yourself now, when you talk to people, and if you're maybe you sometimes forget. So I guess it's my job to remind you to take a second, tonight, really be proud of what you've overcome and all the inner work that you've done and all the battles that you've faced to become the woman you are today. And I think you should really take a moment to be really proud, because I always tell people, like,
Thank you.
I don't want the easy things in life. I want the hard things. And it was not easy to become the person you are today. So I would love to just take a minute for you to take some time and just be proud. Excuse me, be proud of yourself, because
Oh,
that was a lot of hard work.
thank you. I appreciate the compliment. It's hard. I'm gonna admit it's hard for me to recognize my accomplishments, and it's even harder just to sit in them, that I've actually accomplished something. Because to me, it's just I have a really high bar, and then
Mm.
when I hit an accomplishment, it's like, "Oh, okay, yeah, I just hit it," and then I go on to the next thing, and I go on to the next thing, and that's how I've always run my life that way. So it's very interesting that you should say that. But as we close, I'm gonna ask the last question. As we close, what is one small step that somebody can do today that's gonna help them change their tomorrow?
What a lovely question. Build into your day today some time that's going to invest in yourself. So that could be taking some time to exercise for your body. That could be taking time to exercise for your mind, to meditate for your mind. That could be taking time to read a book for 30 minutes that enriches you. It could be a time to go and have a call an old friend that you've lost contact with that you're missing and spend 40 minutes on the phone catching up. Just take some time for yourself to invest in yourself, because that will pay dividends for the rest of your life.
Love it. Lawrence, thank you. And tell us how people can find you, and actually plug your podcast too, which we didn't even get a chance to talk about.
Yeah, same as you. I love talking to wonderful people, and I can't wait for your book to be finished, and me to read it, and us you can come on my podcast and talk all about it. It's called Enter the Lionheart, after my fighting nickname, which was Lionheart, because I had a very bloody second fight, and my coach said, "You really are the Lionheart," and it kind of stuck. So the podcast is just, it's just for adventurous souls trying to be their best self. And everyone tells you when you do a podcast, like, "Oh, niche podcast is the way forward," and it's like, niche. I'm not going to just do a niche podcast. My interests are broad and wide, and I'm curious about many different things. And I want to be able to talk to a doctor about health, a former fighter about fighting, you know, so many different things. A finance guy about setting up his company. Like, there's so many things that I'm curious about. It's not just one thing. So I feel like we're really kindred souls in that way, Sue. Is we have that love of learning, that curiosity,
Yeah.
and I
Yeah.
think that's we're so lucky we have that, because a lot of people don't have
Oh,
that.
oh my god,
And
it's I don't mean I don't mean to interrupt you, but I did the same thing when I named my podcast. People are like, niche down, niche down, niche down. I'm like, no, I don't want to niche down. That's why I have small steps, big wins. I can talk to anybody. So I didn't mean to
Exactly.
interrupt you, but it
No,
was
but
just,
Sue,
I'm just listening,
the,
going like, oh my
yeah,
gosh, that's exactly, I did the exact same thing.
and those people saying that, those people saying that, I think, they're a bit small-minded because I think, if you look at the most successful podcasts in the world, they tend to have broader audiences, broader topics too. And I think, life
True.
is too important and rich to be niche in anything. And it's the same with our life. Like when you're trying to live your life, like I don't just want to be, really financially successful but have no health, or I don't want to have wonderful relationships but be about to have heart disease next month because I'm so out of shape. I want everything because life is about many. There's many different things to living a full life. But sorry, I'm rambling again. But Lawrence Dunning on
Yeah, you know
LinkedIn.
what? I'm getting ready
Yeah,
to
yeah,
ask you another question about work-life balance and how do
yeah.
you like work all that out because there's that balance between like you can only work on so many gardens in your life at once, but yet you've got all these different areas that everybody wants to balance and they want to keep those, you can always be improving on
Mm.
something.
Well, the
And you have that wisdom of life wheel, I think it's called, or we call
yes.
it gardens. It could be, anything. And it's funny because I had a conversation this morning with a gentleman, and his philosophy is that he's like, I don't even teach that. He said, I think that's not very helpful to a lot of people because there's no way we can focus on all being tens in all of those things
Mm,
all the time. He said his suggestion was to pick the top three and then
mm,
pick 2 goals within those top 3 and then focus on those, and you're not locked into them. It's just that's whatever it is for your season to have those as your top 3, whether it's like
mm.
spirituality, family, health, or work or whatever.
Well, you definitely can't
So
have it. You definitely can't have everything. I don't play golf. I think that it probably
right.
appeals to my mind, but I don't have time. So I think you have to learn to say no to things. But at the same time, how many people spend 5 hours a day watching TV or playing video games? A lot.
Mhm,
There is, of course, you can't do everything, but just learn to say no to things, and that's going to open up more time for the things that really matter. But that work-life balance is something that needs constant recalibration, and it's different to me now
mhm,
than it was 4 years ago because now I have a little mini me who I want to spend more time with. So I have to build him into the fabric of my life too. So it's definitely something that you
mhm,
have to keep working on. And I think just being that people that have FOMO, I feel bad for because I don't have FOMO. I can miss out on a bunch of things that I would probably enjoy doing if I had 30 hours in the day instead of 24, but I only have 24. So you have to be realistic. And again, coming back to that analogy of putting the stones in your jar and filling up your days with the most important things, if there is time to go to this party or go and have dinner with a couple, I'll always do it. But if there's not time, it's okay too. I can do that next week. So it's,
mhm,
it's trying to figure out what's more important to you. But I think one
mhm,
thing I will say, if people are listening that are kind of they're a little over on the working and a bit under on the life balance. Just remember, humans are social creatures. We evolved in small groups of Dunbar's number. I think it's 150 people, and we're social creatures. And you saw all the skyrocketing depression during COVID when people were locked away. Like, spend the time to you know. There is a lot of laziness and inertia after a long day, but you can either watch 2 hours of TV or you can get up and drive 50 minutes and go have dinner with somebody. Like, spend the time, make the effort to nurture relationships, especially men. There's a statistic that a lot of men, as they get older, they haven't nurtured male relationships. They just don't really have any friends as they
mhm.
get older. And that's something I've been beyond blessed with. I've got more friends than I can see. I've just met so many wonderful people in Chicago. It's one of the reasons I couldn't move more than an hour from Chicago because I have so many people I want to be around. So I think don't
Mm,
don't take friendships for granted, and they need work. Like, the best marriages are good because both people put in time every day.
mhm.
Nothing in life, you can spend a whole lifetime working out, but if you do nothing for a month, you're going to lose a lot of your fitness. Everything you have to always put the time and energy in. So nurture those friendships. I think that's really important.
I heard you say, I think it was on another podcast, that you think about life not in days or even years, but then in decades. So if you think about life in decades, that and put it on that time frame, that perspective, then you don't have FOMO because if there's something that you really want to do, you can say, okay, I don't have to do that today, but I can put that on my bucket list and I can do that tomorrow and that's okay. But I accomplished what I wanted to get done in this day, and this was the best day for me. And
Mm,
I think living life like that just eradicates FOMO, because if you
yeah.
go to bed at the end of the day and say, well, either the day sucked or it didn't, but even if it sucked, hey, I still did the best to make it the best day I could. I get up, God willing, I'll get up tomorrow morning and I get to do it again.
Exactly. I think if you're facing a
So,
tough decision in life, the answer is always, what would myself in 10 years want me to do now? It'll always give you the answer. And I
yeah,
think that's such a good metric.
love that. Yeah, I love that. So enter the Lionheart, people can listen to you more there and reach out to
Lauren
you through
Stunning.
there, yes?
Yeah, and Lauren
Mm,
Stunning on LinkedIn and Instagram. Yeah, I'm pretty easy to find. I don't have any weird handles, but yeah, I love having these conversations, and it's been such a pleasure. You're
me too.
such a kindred spirit, and I really meant what I said.
Oh,
Take some time to be proud of yourself, because I can tell you're the
thank
type of
you.
person that's incredibly hard on yourself, and that's something that I've had to learn to do, is just take a step back and just enjoy how far you've come. Because when you're always looking like, what's the next thing, what's the next thing, we forget we've traveled miles past from our old self. And it's one thing I've really done the last 6 months is just, I'm just pausing and I'm just enjoying how far I've come, and kind
Mm,
of looking back over my shoulder and just taking some time, taking some time to breathe it in. So I'm just passing that wisdom on to you. One of my good friends, who he always says, where there's overlap, there's truth. So hopefully there's some truth there
yeah.
between him and I. And he sounds like a wonderful guy.
Yeah. Yeah, he is. He's a great guy. I actually he is threaded and weaved through my book because I couldn't tell my story without my coach.
That's beautiful.
So I have a deep appreciation for him. Well, Lawrence, thank you for the gift of your time. This has been an amazing conversation. And yes, kindred spirits. Yes, I'm so happy to talk to you.
Oh,
And thank you again.
it was an honor. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Small Steps, Big Wins podcast. I value your time with me and I seek to make every moment count. In order to make lasting change in your life, listening is usually not enough. So I want to ask you, what practical steps are you going to put into action today as a result of listening to this podcast? Remember, any step, any action, no matter how small, starts your journey to a big win. And if you're not sure where to get started, check out my website, personalcoachfinder.com, and find someone who can help. Remember, life doesn't get better by chance, it gets better by choice. Take small steps today and make your life awesome, friends.